Good evening, and welcome back to another journey through the quieter corners of history. Tonight, we're traveling to places where the boundary between earth and sky was never quite as clear as we might imagine today. We're exploring the world of those who claim dominion over the clouds themselves, the Rainmakers of Africa, spiritual intermediaries who held the sacred responsibility of calling down the life-giving waters from above. Before we settle in for this evening's exploration, if you enjoy what we do here, these gentle wanderings through forgotten stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to join our community of fellow history lovers. And I'm always curious to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the world you're in as we explore these ancient mysteries together. There's something wonderfully connecting about knowing we're all here, in different places, sharing these same stories. Now, dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's step into a world where the rhythm of daily life moved to the ancient pulse of seasonal rains. Tonight, we'll walk alongside those who shouldered the immense responsibility of summoning the clouds, feel the weight of their sacred duties, and understand what happened when the skies remained stubbornly clear. The rain, you see, was never just water falling from the sky. It was politics, spirituality, survival, and power all woven together in drops that could make or break entire civilizations. And at the center of it all stood figures both revered and feared, the Rainmakers, holding secrets that connected the human world to the realm of the ancestors and the gods. Verse 1. The Rainmakers' Dawn Daily Life Immersion. You are a Dinka rainmaker preparing potions and chants under stormy skies. The first light of dawn creeps across the vast expanse of the South Sudanese savanna, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. You wake not to the sound of roosters or the bustle of a village stirring to life, but to something far more subtle, a change in the air pressure, a shift in the wind that speaks to senses honed by generations of watching the sky. You are Ayak, a rainmaker among the Dinka people, and this morning carries with it the weight of expectation. The dry season has stretched longer than usual, and the cattle, those sacred, beloved cattle that are the heartbeat of Dinka life, are growing restless. Their lowing has taken on a different tone, one that speaks of thirst and the anxiety that comes when the great patterns of rain seem to falter. Rising from your sleeping mat, you step outside your tukul, the traditional round hut that has sheltered your family for generations. The walls, made of mud and dung, still hold the coolness of night, but you can feel the promise of heat in the air. Above, the sky is a canvas of possibilities, clouds gathering in the distance, their edges touched with the silver light of dawn, but not yet heavy with the promise of rain. Your bare feet know every inch of the ground as you walk to the sacred grove where your tools wait. This is not the hurried preparation of someone following a recipe, but the measured, deliberate movements of one who understands that every gesture carries meaning. Every word spoken will ripple outward into the realm where ancestors dwell and where the spirits of rain gather to listen. The first task is always the same, the preparation of the sacred water. You kneel beside the clay pot that has been in your family for 3 generations, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. The water inside is not ordinary water. It was collected during the last successful rain ceremony, blessed by the elders, and kept pure through careful ritual. A few drops of this sacred water will form the heart of today's preparation. As you work, your mind moves through the complex web of relationships that govern rain among the Dinka. You are not simply calling water from the sky. You are negotiating with the ancestors, balancing the needs of the living with the wisdom of the dead, maintaining the delicate harmony that keeps the world in proper order. The rain does not fall because you command it. It falls because you have maintained the sacred relationships that make its arrival possible. The preparation of the rain medicine is a process that begins before sunrise and continues well into the morning. From your leather pouch, you draw out roots and herbs that have been gathered under specific conditions, some collected during the full moon, others only when the morning dew still clings to their leaves. There is the bark of the baobab tree, scraped carefully from the eastern side where the sun first touches it each day. There are seeds from the tamarind tree, pods that have been dried and ground into a fine powder that carries the essence of both sweetness and tartness, representing the dual nature of rain itself, both blessing and potential flood. Each ingredient is added to the clay bowl with deliberate care. You do not measure by weight or volume, but by the feel of the elements in your hands, by the way the mixture responds to your touch. The grinding stone, worn smooth by your father and his father before him, creates a rhythm that seems to match the distant rumble of thunder that promises to grow stronger as the day progresses. The clouds are building now, great towers of white and gray that rise from the horizon like the pillars of some vast celestial temple. You pause in your work to watch them, reading their shapes and movements with the same attention a scholar might give to ancient texts. These clouds speak of moisture drawn up from distant lakes, of winds that have traveled across hundreds of miles, gathering the elements that will eventually fall as rain. But clouds alone are not enough. The physical and the spiritual must work in harmony, and this is where your true skill lies. As you continue preparing the medicine, you begin the chants that will accompany the ceremony. These are not songs in any conventional sense, but rather a form of prayer conversation with the spirits who govern the rain. The words are old, some of them so ancient that their original meanings have been lost, surviving only in the sound and rhythm that pleases the ancestors. The chanting begins low and soft, almost a whisper that blends with the morning sounds of the savanna. Gradually, it grows stronger, more insistent, as if you are calling across a great distance to beings who may or may not choose to listen. The rhythm of the chant matches the rhythm of your grinding, creating a meditation that draws you deeper into the sacred work. Around you, the natural world begins to respond to the building storm. The air grows heavier, thick with humidity that makes your skin glisten with moisture. The birds change their songs, calling to each other with the urgency that precedes rain. In the distance, the cattle begin to move restlessly, their ancient instincts telling them that change is coming. The rain medicine is nearly ready now, a dark paste that carries the concentrated essence of the savanna itself. You add the sacred water, drop by drop, watching as the mixture transforms into something that seems to hold the very spirit of the storm within it. The smell is earthy and complex hints of iron from the red soil, the green scent of growing things, the sharp tang of approaching rain. As you work, you are not alone. Though no human eyes may see you at this moment, you are surrounded by the presence of the ancestors who once held this same responsibility. You feel their guidance in the steady rhythm of your hands, their approval in the way the elements blend together perfectly. This is not magic in the sense of supernatural power wielded by an individual, but rather the careful maintenance of relationships that stretch back through generations. The first drops of rain begin to fall as you complete the preparation. They are large, warm drops that land on your shoulders and arms with the gentle impact of a blessing. You do not smile or show satisfaction. This is still the beginning, not the end. The rain that falls now is only a promise of what might come. Your work is to help that promise become reality. You take the bowl of rain medicine and walk to the center of the grove, where a circle of stones has marked the sacred space for generations. The rain is falling more steadily now, turning the dust beneath your feet into fragrant mud that releases the smell of earth awakening. You begin to anoint the stones with the medicine, moving in the pattern that your father taught you, that his father taught him, in an unbroken chain stretching back to the first rainmaker. The chanting grows stronger, more complex as you move through the ceremony. You are joined now by other voices, not human voices, but the voice of the wind through the acacia trees, the voice of the rain itself drumming against the leaves, the voice of the earth drinking in the moisture it has waited for. The ceremony becomes a conversation between all the elements of the world, with you as the translator, the bridge between the needs of the human community and the vast forces of nature. As the morning progresses, the rain grows heavier, and you know that the ceremony has been successful. But success in rainmaking is not simply about producing precipitation. It is about producing the right kind of rain, in the right amount, at the right time. Too little, and the crops will fail. Too much, and the floods will destroy what little has been planted. The rainmaker's skill lies not just in calling the rain, but in calling the right rain. You continue the ceremony, even as the rain soaks through your clothes and runs in rivulets down your face. This is the most delicate part of the process, maintaining the balance between encouragement and restraint, between calling the rain and knowing when to let it fall naturally. The chanting becomes a dialogue with the storm itself, a gentle negotiation that respects the power of the elements while asserting the needs of the community. The rain medicine in your bowl is nearly gone now, mixed with the rainwater that falls from the sky, creating a perfect union of the earthly and the celestial. You drink the last of it, feeling the taste of the savanna on your tongue, the essence of the approaching storm in your throat. This is the moment of deepest connection, when the boundary between the rainmaker and the rain itself becomes thin and permeable. And then, as suddenly as it began, the ceremony reaches its natural conclusion. The rain continues to fall, but your active role in calling it has ended. You have done what you can do, maintained the relationships that needed to be maintained, spoken the words that needed to be spoken. The rest is in the hands of forces greater than any human, even a rainmaker. You walk back to your tukul through the gentle rain, feeling the satisfaction that comes not from controlling nature, but from working in harmony with it. The cattle are already moving toward the areas where the rain has begun to pool, their long tongues lapping at the fresh water with obvious relief. The children of the village are beginning to emerge from their shelters, their faces turned upward to catch the falling drops, their laughter mixing with the sound of the rain. But even as you rest, you know that this is only one ceremony among many. The rainmaker's work is never finished, never complete. Tomorrow there may be need for different medicine, different chants, different negotiations with the forces that govern the weather. The responsibility is constant, the weight of it both heavy and strangely comforting. You settle into your hut as the rain continues to fall outside, a steady rhythm that speaks of life returning to the dry places, of balance restored to the world. But you know that this balance is temporary, that the great cycle of dry and wet, scarcity and abundance will continue to turn. And when it does, you will be ready, as your fathers were ready, as your children will be ready when their time comes to stand between the earth and the sky and call down the life-giving rain. The rainmaker's work is never done, but for now, for this moment, it is enough. The rain falls, the earth drinks, and the great wheel of the seasons turns as it should. In the gentle sound of water falling from the sky, you hear the voice of the ancestors, approving, eternal, and patient as the savanna itself. Verse 2. The chief who commanded the storms, the arrest of Chief Makoni, accused of controlling weather during colonial Rhodesia. The transition from the timeless world of the Dinka rainmaker to colonial Rhodesia in 1896 is like stepping from one universe into another. Where the morning savanna held the gentle negotiations between human and divine, the highlands of what would become Zimbabwe were crackling with a different kind of tension. The collision between ancient authority and imperial power, between those who claimed to read the sky and those who claimed to rule the earth. Chief Makoni was not a man who commanded attention through physical presence alone, though his bearing spoke of generations of leadership. He was perhaps 60 years of age when the colonial authorities first took serious notice of him. His hair touched with gray, his hands bearing the calluses of a man who had worked the red soil of Mashonaland for decades. But it was not his age or his appearance that made him dangerous in the eyes of the British South Africa Company. It was his reputation as a rainmaker, and more troubling still, as one who could withhold the rain. The Shona people had lived in these rolling hills and granite outcroppings for centuries. and their relationship with the rains was as complex and nuanced as the landscape itself. This was not the vast, open savanna of the Dinka, but a land of dramatic contrasts, towering kopjes that seemed to scrape the belly of the clouds, deep valleys where mist gathered in the early morning hours, and ancient granite formations that the ancestors had marked with their paintings and their presence. Chief Makoni's authority over the weather was not a recent development, not some desperate claim made in the face of colonial pressure. His family had held this responsibility for generations, serving as intermediaries between the human world and the realm of the ancestral spirits, known as the Mudzimu. The rains, in Shona cosmology, were never simply meteorological events. They were expressions of spiritual harmony or discord, manifestations of the ancestors' approval or displeasure with the conduct of the living. The colonial records, preserved in the dusty archives of Salisbury now, Harari paint a picture of growing unease among the white settlers as the dry season of 1896 stretched longer than usual. The maize crops were failing, the rivers running low, and the cattle that represented the wealth of both settler and African were beginning to show the gaunt signs of prolonged drought. In the traditional African worldview, such conditions were never mere accidents of weather. They were signs that the spiritual equilibrium had been disturbed. But what made Chief Makoni particularly dangerous in colonial eyes was not just his claimed ability to bring rain, but his rumored power to prevent it. The whispers among both African and settler communities spoke of his ability to tie up the rain, to bind the clouds and keep them from releasing their precious cargo. In a land where survival depended on the seasonal rains, such power was both awesome and terrifying. The first documented confrontation between Chief Makoni and colonial authority came not during the height of drought, but during a period of relative abundance. A minor colonial official, a certain Mr. Henderson, had demanded that the chief provide additional labor for the construction of a new administrative post. The chief had refused, stating that his people were needed for the crucial work of preparing the fields for the coming planting season. Within a week of this refusal, the rains that had been falling steadily across the region suddenly stopped. The skies remained blue and cloudless day after day, while the surrounding areas continued to receive their normal precipitation. The phenomenon was so localized, so seemingly targeted, that even the most skeptical colonial observers began to take notice. Henderson, a practical man trained in the bureaucratic methods of imperial administration, initially dismissed the coincidence as exactly that coincidence. But as the dry spell continued, and as reports reached him of similar incidents in other parts of Chief Makoni's territory, his certainty began to waver. The African workers on his construction project spoke in hushed tones of the chief's power, and more than one threatened to abandon the work entirely if the spiritual conflict was not resolved. The deeper problem, from the colonial perspective, was that Chief Makoni's authority over the weather was intimately connected to his political power. The Shona system of governance was not built on the European model of secular authority backed by military force. Instead, it rested on the complex interplay between political leadership and spiritual legitimacy. A chief who could not ensure the rains was a chief who had lost the favor of the ancestors, and therefore the right to rule. This spiritual dimension of political power was something that the colonial administrators found both incomprehensible and deeply threatening. They were accustomed to dealing with resistance, expressed through conventional means-armed rebellion, political negotiation, economic pressure. But how could they negotiate with someone whose authority seemed to rest on his ability to control the very sky? The situation came to a head during the Great Drought of late 1896. The rains that should have marked the beginning of the growing season failed to arrive. Across a wide swath of Maconoland, colonial crops withered in the fields. African communities began the grim process of rationing their stored grain, and the rivers that powered the early mining operations dwindled to muddy streams. But in the territory controlled by Chief Makoni, the drought was complete and absolute. Not a drop of rain had fallen for months, and the red earth had cracked into patterns that resembled the dried hide of some enormous beast. The chief's own people were suffering as much as anyone, yet they continued to support him, continued to believe that his withholding of the rain was part of some larger spiritual strategy that would ultimately benefit the community. The colonial response was swift and decisive. A force of native police, accompanied by a detachment of regular troops, was dispatched to arrest Chief Makoni on charges that would have been laughable in any European court conspiracy to control the weather, use of witchcraft to damage colonial property, and incitement to rebellion through supernatural means. The arrest itself was a study in the collision of two completely different worldviews. The colonial force arrived at the chief's homestead on a morning when the sky was a merciless dome of blue, the sun already hot despite the early hour. They expected to find either a defiant political leader or a frightened old man caught in a web of superstition. Instead, they found Chief Makoni calmly tending to his cattle, going about the mundane tasks of daily life, as if the drought that was devastating the region was of no particular concern. The officer in charge, a Captain Morrison, who had seen service in India and considered himself experienced in dealing with native unrest, was struck by the chief's composure. There was no bluster, no theatrical display of power, no attempt to rally his people for resistance. When informed that he was under arrest, Chief Makoni simply nodded and asked for a few moments to speak with his wives and children. But as the arrest party prepared to leave with their prisoner, something extraordinary happened. A single cloud appeared on the horizon, growing with impossible speed until it covered the sky above the homestead. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and the first drops began to fall just as Chief Makoni was being loaded into the colonial wagon. The rain that followed was unlike anything the region had experienced in months. It was not the gentle, life-giving precipitation that farmers prayed for, but a violent, almost angry downpour that turned the drought-hardened earth into a sea of red mud. The colonial forces found themselves struggling through conditions that made travel nearly impossible, their wagon wheels sinking deep into the suddenly saturated ground. Captain Morrison, a man not given to superstitious thinking, nevertheless, found himself deeply unsettled by the timing of the storm. In his official report, filed weeks later, he would describe the incident in carefully neutral language, noting only that inclement weather complicated the transport of the prisoner. But in private letters to his wife, he wrote of his growing unease with the entire enterprise, his sense that they were meddling with forces beyond their understanding. The journey to Salisbury, normally a matter of 2 days' travel, stretched into a week-long ordeal. The rain continued with relentless intensity, washing out bridges, turning streams into torrents, and making the roads impassable. The irony was not lost on anyone in the party. They were arresting a man for controlling the weather, while being trapped by the very weather he was accused of commanding. Chief Makoni himself remained calm throughout the journey, accepting the hardships of travel with the same equanimity he had shown during his arrest. He spoke little, and when he did speak, it was to offer practical advice about safe routes through the flooding landscape. There was no gloating, no suggestion that the storm was his doing, no hint of the theatrical behavior that the colonial officers expected from someone accused of supernatural crimes. The trial, when it finally took place, was a surreal affair that highlighted the fundamental incompatibility between African and European concepts of justice. The prosecution struggled to present evidence for crimes that had no precedent in English law. How could they prove that someone had used witchcraft to prevent rain? What witnesses could testify to supernatural activities? How could a court evaluate the effectiveness of spiritual interventions? The colonial magistrate, a man named Hartley, who had trained in London and prided himself on his adherence to proper legal procedure, found himself presiding over proceedings that would have been at home in medieval Europe. Witness after witness testified to Chief Makoni's reputation as a rainmaker, to the correlation between his political actions and the behavior of the weather, to their belief in his power over the elements. But belief, as Magistrate Hartley well knew, was not evidence. The drought could be explained by natural causes. The timing of the storm during the chief's arrest could be dismissed as coincidence, and the testimony of African witnesses could be discounted as superstition. By the standards of colonial law, there was no case to answer. Yet the political reality was more complex than the legal one. Chief Makoni's influence over his people was undeniable, and that influence was intimately connected to his reputation as a rainmaker. To simply release him would be to acknowledge the validity of his spiritual authority, to suggest that the colonial government was powerless against African magic. To convict him would be to give official credence to the very superstitions that the colonial project was supposed to be dispelling. The solution, when it came, was characteristically colonial in its bureaucratic creativity. Chief Makoni was convicted not of controlling the weather, but of conduct prejudicial to the public peace. The evidence was reframed, not as proof of supernatural power, but as proof of his ability to influence his followers through the manipulation of their beliefs. The sentence was 3 years of imprisonment, to be served in the capital, where his influence over local weather patterns would presumably be neutralized. The chief accepted the verdict with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout the entire proceedings. He made no dramatic speeches, issued no threats, offered no predictions about the consequences of his imprisonment. He simply nodded to the magistrate and allowed himself to be led away to begin his sentence. But the story of Chief Makoni did not end with his conviction. Within weeks of his imprisonment, the rains returned to his territory with a vengeance. The drought that had lasted for months broke in a series of storms that brought floods, crop failures, and destruction on a scale that made the previous dry spell seem benign by comparison. The delicate balance that had existed between human needs and natural forces seemed to have been shattered entirely. The colonial authorities found themselves in an impossible position. They could not officially acknowledge any connection between the chief's imprisonment and the destructive weather that followed. But they could not ignore the growing unrest among the African population, the widespread belief that the ancestors were expressing their displeasure through wind and flood, the very foundations of colonial control, the assumption that European rationality was superior to African superstition, were being called into question by the behavior of the sky itself. Chief Makoni served only 18 months of his 3-year sentence. His release was justified on grounds of good behavior and the need to reduce overcrowding in the colonial prison system. But those who were present at the time spoke of more pragmatic considerations: the growing political instability in his territory, the increasing difficulty of governing a population that believed their spiritual leader was being unjustly held, and perhaps most significantly, the persistent problems with extreme weather that seemed to defy all attempts at prediction or control. When the chief returned to his territory, he was greeted not as a defeated prisoner, but as a spiritual leader whose power had been confirmed by his very persecution. The story of his arrest, his calm dignity during imprisonment, and the strange weather that had accompanied his ordeal became part of the oral tradition that would sustain resistance to colonial rule for generations to come. The rain, when it returned to normal patterns after his release, seemed to carry with it a message about the limits of colonial power, about the persistence of older forms of authority that could not be simply legislated out of existence. Chief Makoni resumed his traditional role as rainmaker and political leader, but now with the added legitimacy that came from having survived the test of colonial persecution. The colonial records of the incident, preserved in archives that few would ever consult, tell a story of administrative efficiency and proper legal procedure. But the African oral tradition tells a different story of a chief who was so powerful that even his enemies were forced to imprison him to break the drought he had created, and whose return brought with it the restoration of the proper relationship between heaven and earth. In the end, perhaps both stories are true, each reflecting the worldview of those who tell it. Chief Makoni remains a figure suspended between different systems of understanding, a man whose life was shaped by the collision between the ancient authority of the Rainmaker and the modern power of the colonial state. His legacy lies not in any final victory or defeat, but in the questions his story raises about the nature of power itself and the mysterious ways in which human authority intersects with the forces that govern the sky. Verse 3. The Rain Queen's sacred domain, the rain shrine complex of the Balabadu, Queen Maujaji and her sacred authority, deep in the Limpopo province of South Africa, where the Drakensberg Mountains meet the endless expanse of the African veldt, lies a place that exists at the intersection of the physical and the mystical. Here, in a landscape of ancient cycad forests and mist-shrouded peaks, stands one of Africa's most enduring mysteries, the sacred domain of the Rain Queen, Maujaji, whose very name has become synonymous with the power to command the clouds themselves. The approach to the royal kraal is not dramatic in the way that European palaces announce themselves with grand gates and sweeping drives. Instead, the path winds gently through terrain that seems to grow more otherworldly with each step. The cycads that dot the landscape are living fossils, unchanged for millions of years. Their prehistoric fronds creating shadows that seem to hold secrets from the very dawn of time. These ancient plants, found nowhere else in such abundance, serve as the first indication that this is no ordinary place. The Balabadu people have lived in these mountains for centuries, but their relationship with this landscape goes deeper than mere habitation. Every stream, every rocky outcropping, every grove of trees carries spiritual significance in a complex web of sacred geography that centers on the figure of the Rain Queen herself. She is not simply a ruler in the conventional sense, but rather a living bridge between the human world and the realm of the ancestors, a conduit through which the life-giving rains flow from heaven to earth. The current Rain Queen, for there is always a Rain Queen, the title passing through a carefully maintained matrilineal succession lives in a compound that reflects the unique nature of her authority. Unlike the elaborate palaces of kings who rule through military might or the administrative centers of modern governments, her residence is designed not for display, but for function, the specific function of mediating between earth and sky. The main dwelling, known as the Great Hut, sits at the center of a carefully planned complex of smaller buildings, each serving a specific role in the intricate ceremonies that govern the coming and going of the rains. The walls are made of the red earth of the mountains themselves, mixed with water from the sacred springs that bubble up throughout the territory. This is not merely practical construction. It is a physical manifestation of the connection between the Rain Queen and the land she serves. But it is the rain shrine itself that forms the true heart of the complex. Hidden from casual observation, protected by both physical barriers and spiritual prohibitions, this ancient structure represents one of Africa's most sophisticated approaches to weather management. The shrine is not a single building, but rather a collection of interconnected chambers, each designed to capture and channel different aspects of the atmospheric forces that govern precipitation. The architecture of the shrine reflects a deep understanding of local meteorological patterns that would impress modern weather forecasters. Built into the slope of the mountain at a carefully chosen elevation, the structure takes advantage of natural air currents that flow up from the valleys below. The positioning is such that it catches the moisture-laden winds that rise from the Indian Ocean, forcing them upward into the cooler air, where condensation naturally occurs. The main chamber of the shrine contains what visitors describe as a bewildering array of objects, each with its own role in the complex technology of rainmaking. There are carved wooden vessels designed to hold water from specific sources, some from springs that never run dry, others from pools that form only during the heaviest rains. There are collections of stones, each chosen for its unique properties, its ability to hold moisture or to channel spiritual energy in particular ways. The most mysterious elements of the shrine are the rain medicines themselves, complex preparations that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge about the relationship between plant chemistry and atmospheric conditions. These medicines are not the simple herbal remedies that outsiders might expect, but rather sophisticated compounds that seem to operate on principles that blur the line between chemistry and spirituality. The preparation of these medicines is perhaps the most closely guarded secret of the Rain Queen's authority. The process begins months before the rainy season, with the careful gathering of ingredients according to a lunar calendar that takes into account not only the phases of the moon, but also the complex interactions between celestial cycles and terrestrial weather patterns. Some plants must be harvested during specific atmospheric conditions, when the air pressure is falling, when certain winds are blowing, when the morning dew contains the precise combination of moisture and minerals that makes it effective. The queen herself is trained from childhood in the reading of atmospheric signs that would be invisible to untrained observers. She learns to interpret the behavior of the cycads, whose ancient sensitivity to changes in air pressure makes them living barometers. She studies the flight patterns of birds, the movement of insects, the way that certain flowers open and close in response to humidity levels. This is not folk wisdom, but rather a sophisticated system of environmental monitoring that has been refined over generations. The actual ceremonies that take place within the shrine are conducted in complete secrecy, with only the queen and her most trusted advisors present. But the effects of these ceremonies can be observed by anyone who knows how to read the signs. The local meteorological patterns in the area surrounding the shrine show statistical anomalies that have puzzled modern weather forecasters. Precipitation levels are consistently higher than in surrounding areas, and the timing of rainfall shows a correlation with the ceremonial calendar that defies conventional explanation. The Rain Queen's authority extends far beyond the borders of her immediate territory. During times of drought, delegations arrive from across southern Africa, bringing gifts and requests for intervention. These are not desperate appeals from primitive peoples clinging to superstition, but rather carefully negotiated diplomatic missions from sophisticated societies that have learned to respect the Queen's unique abilities. The diplomatic protocols surrounding these visits reveal the complex political dimensions of weather control in traditional African society. The Queen does not simply grant or refuse requests for rain, she negotiates, establishing terms that often involve complex exchanges of goods, services, and political alliances. A successful rain ceremony might require the visiting delegation to provide specific items for the shrine, to perform particular rituals in their home territory, or to maintain certain environmental protections that will support the broader atmospheric conditions necessary for effective weather management. The technology of the shrine extends beyond the physical structures and chemical preparations to include what can only be described as a sophisticated information network. The Rain Queen maintains contact with weather watchers throughout the region, people trained to observe and report on atmospheric conditions across thousands of square miles. This network, operating entirely through human messengers and traditional communication methods, provides the Queen with detailed meteorological data that rivals the information available to modern weather services. The messengers who carry this information are not ordinary travelers, but rather specialized individuals who have been trained to observe and remember precise details about atmospheric conditions. They can report on cloud formations, wind patterns, temperature variations, and humidity levels with an accuracy that astounds modern meteorologists. Their reports allow the Rain Queen to track the movement of weather systems across the subcontinent, predicting the arrival of rain-bearing air masses days or even weeks in advance. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Rain Queen's technology is its integration with the natural environment itself. Rather than attempting to control weather through force or manipulation, the entire system is designed to work in harmony with existing atmospheric patterns. The ceremonies and preparations are timed to coincide with natural conditions that favor precipitation, amplifying and directing forces that are already present rather than trying to create them from nothing. The cycad forests that surround the shrine play a crucial role in this environmental integration. These ancient plants have evolved over millions of years to be extremely sensitive to changes in atmospheric moisture, and their presence creates a unique microclimate that naturally favors cloud formation. The Rain Queen's ancestors recognized this and built their ceremonial complex in the location where these natural conditions would be most supportive of their weatherworking activities. The sacred pools that dot the landscape serve both spiritual and practical functions in the rain-making process. From a spiritual perspective, they are the dwelling places of ancestral spirits who assist in the ceremonies. From a practical standpoint, they serve as sources of the pure water necessary for certain preparations, and their presence helps to maintain the high humidity levels that support cloud formation in the area. The mystery of how the Rain Queen's methods actually work remains as compelling today as it was centuries ago when the first European explorers encountered her domain. Modern atmospheric scientists who have studied the region acknowledge that something unusual is happening, but they struggle to explain the mechanisms involved. The correlation between ceremonial activities and subsequent weather patterns is too consistent to dismiss as coincidence, yet too complex to reduce to simple cause and effect. Some researchers have suggested that the Rain Queen's methods work through a form of atmospheric seeding, using the chemical compounds in her rain medicines to provide nucleation sites for cloud formation. Others point to possible electromagnetic effects, noting that the high iron content of the local soil and the presence of certain minerals in the shrine might create conditions that influence atmospheric electrical activity in ways that promote precipitation. But these scientific explanations, while intriguing, fail to capture the full complexity of what takes place in the Rain Queen's domain. The technology involved is not simply a matter of chemistry or physics, but rather a holistic system that integrates human consciousness with natural processes in ways that Western science is only beginning to understand. The Rain Queen herself remains a figure of profound mystery, even to those who know her personally. She is bound by traditions that limit her movement, her interactions with the outside world, and even her personal relationships. She may not marry, may not leave her territory, except under the most extraordinary circumstances, and must maintain a ritual purity that governs every aspect of her daily life. In return for these sacrifices, she wields a power that extends far beyond the political authority of conventional rulers. The succession to the position of Rain Queen follows ancient protocols that ensure continuity of both knowledge and spiritual authority. The chosen successor begins training in childhood, learning not only the practical skills of weather observation and rain medicine preparation, but also the deeper spiritual disciplines that allow her to serve as a conduit between the human and divine realms. As night falls over the cycad forests and the mist begins to gather in the valleys below, the Rain Queen's domain takes on an even more otherworldly quality. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant calls of night birds and the soft sound of water flowing in the sacred streams. In this environment, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural becomes thin and permeable, and it becomes easier to understand how the ancient technology of rainmaking might indeed be able to reach up and touch the sky itself. The Rain Queen's story continues to unfold in the modern world, where satellite weather forecasting and computer climate modeling exist alongside traditional methods that may be far older and, in their own way, far more sophisticated. Her domain remains a place where the ancient and the contemporary coexist, where the mysteries of weather control continue to be practiced by methods that science has not yet fully comprehended, but can no longer afford to dismiss. Verse 4. The Thunder Priests of Yoruba, the interplay of meteorology, magic, and rebellion among Yoruba rain priests. The journey from the misty mountains of the Rain Queen's domain to the bustling cities and ancient kingdoms of Yoruba takes us into a world where the control of weather becomes something altogether more complex and politically charged. Here, in the heart of what is now Nigeria, The manipulation of rain and storm has never been the quiet, hidden practice of solitary figures communing with ancestral spirits. Instead, it has been the domain of organized priesthoods, political institutions, and revolutionary movements that have used the power of the sky as both shield and sword in the great struggles that have shaped West African history. The Yoruba understanding of weather control rests on a cosmology that is both more elaborate and more contentious than the traditions we have explored thus far. At its center stands Shango, the Orisha of thunder and lightning, a figure who is simultaneously divine spirit, historical king, and political symbol. The priests who serve Shango, known as Babalawo, when they achieve the highest levels of initiation, are not merely weather workers, but rather specialists in the volatile intersection between celestial power and earthly politics. The city of Oyo, ancient capital of one of West Africa's most powerful kingdoms, provides the perfect window into this world. Even today, centuries after its political eclipse, the city retains an atmosphere that speaks of its former grandeur. The streets wind between compounds that once housed the retinues of powerful chiefs, past markets where the wealth of half a continent once changed hands, and through neighborhoods where the sound of drums and the scent of sacrificial offerings still mark the presence of active shrines. It is in one of these shrines, dedicated to Shango, that we encounter a figure who embodies the complexity of Yoruba weather magic. Babalawo Aduni is not an ancient sage withdrawn from the world, but rather a man deeply engaged with the political and social currents of his time. His shrine, while traditional in its essential elements, incorporates innovations that reflect the Yoruba people's long history of adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their core spiritual practices. The shrine itself is a study in the marriage of the practical and the mystical. The main structure, built around a central courtyard, is designed to channel the dramatic thunderstorms that are a feature of the West African climate. The roof is constructed with carefully calculated slopes that direct rainwater into a series of collection pools, each serving a specific ritual purpose. The walls are decorated with representations of Shango symbols, the double-headed axe, the ram, the thunderstones that are said to fall from the sky during his most powerful manifestations. But it is the meteorological instruments that make this shrine unique among the places we have visited. Alongside the traditional divination tools and ritual paraphernalia, Babalawo Aduni maintains a collection of weather monitoring devices that would not be out of place in a modern meteorological station. There are barometers crafted by local artisans according to principles learned from European traders, wind vanes that incorporate traditional symbols while functioning according to scientific principles, and rain gauges that measure precipitation with an accuracy that serves both ritual and practical purposes. This integration of traditional and modern approaches to weather observation reflects the Yoruba people's long history of cultural synthesis. Unlike some African societies that maintain strict separation between indigenous and foreign knowledge systems, the Yoruba have always been willing to incorporate useful innovations while maintaining the essential core of their spiritual practices. The result is a form of weather magic that is both deeply rooted in ancient tradition and remarkably adaptable to contemporary conditions. Babalawo Aduni's own training illustrates this synthesis perfectly. He began his education in the traditional manner, learning the complex oral traditions that encode centuries of accumulated knowledge about weather patterns, seasonal cycles, and the spiritual forces that govern atmospheric phenomena. But his education also included instruction in mathematics, astronomy, and what we would now call meteorology, taught by scholars who understood that effective weather magic required precise knowledge of the physical processes involved. The divination system used by Shango priests to predict and influence weather represents one of the most sophisticated approaches to atmospheric forecasting developed in pre-industrial Africa. The Ifa divination system, with its complex pattern of symbols and interpretations, functions as both a spiritual practice and a method for processing vast amounts of environmental data. Each divination session involves the analysis of multiple variables: atmospheric pressure, wind patterns, temperature variations, humidity levels, and dozens of other factors that influence weather formation. But the Yoruba approach to weather magic differs from the traditions we have explored earlier in its explicitly political dimension. Shango is not just the god of thunder, he is also the patron of resistance to tyranny, the divine champion of those who fight against oppression. This dual role has made his priests natural allies of political movements that seek to challenge established authority, whether that authority is exercised by African kings or European colonizers. The historical record is filled with accounts of Shango priests who used their control over weather as a weapon of resistance. During the Yoruba civil wars of the 19th century, competing kingdoms sought to recruit powerful weather workers to their cause, understanding that the ability to bring rain to one's own territory, while withholding it from enemies, could be as decisive as military victory. The priests who possessed these abilities found themselves at the center of political intrigue, their loyalties courted by all sides, their powers both feared and desperately needed. The arrival of European colonialism added new dimensions to this political role. The British colonial administration, like their counterparts elsewhere in Africa, found themselves confronting a form of resistance that they were poorly equipped to understand or counter. Traditional military tactics were useless against opponents who claimed the ability to call down lightning from the sky, and conventional legal procedures seemed inadequate when dealing with crimes that involved the manipulation of atmospheric forces. The case of Babalao Ogundimu, a Shango priest who operated in the Lagos area during the early years of colonial rule, illustrates the complexity of this confrontation. Ogundimu had gained a reputation for his ability to predict the coming of storms with uncanny accuracy, and his forecasts were sought by both African farmers and European traders, needed to plan their activities around the vagaries of the tropical climate. But Ogundimu's weather predictions came with a political edge that made the colonial authorities increasingly uncomfortable. His forecasts were invariably accompanied by commentary on the spiritual significance of the weather patterns he predicted, and this commentary often included thinly veiled criticisms of colonial policy. A prediction of drought might be accompanied by observations about the anger of the ancestors at the disruption of traditional land tenure systems. A forecast of violent storms might include warnings about the consequences of interfering with sacred sites or traditional religious practices. The colonial response to Ogundimu's activities reveals the fundamental challenge that weather magic posed to European authority. Unlike other forms of African resistance, which could be countered through military force or political negotiation, weather magic operated in a realm where European power was essentially irrelevant. The colonial government could arrest priests, ban ceremonies, and confiscate ritual objects, but they could not prevent the rains from falling or the storms from coming. This limitation became apparent during the Great Drought of 1905, when crop failures across the Lagos Protectorate led to widespread hunger and social unrest. The colonial administration, desperate to maintain order, found itself in the unprecedented position of seeking assistance from the very traditional authorities it was trying to suppress. Secret negotiations were opened with Ogundimu and other prominent weather workers, offering them official recognition and financial compensation in exchange for their cooperation in ending the drought. The negotiations themselves were a masterpiece of diplomatic complexity. The colonial officials could not openly acknowledge their belief in the effectiveness of weather magic without undermining their claims to represent a superior, more rational form of civilization. The Yoruba priests, for their part, could not be seen to be collaborating with colonial authority without losing their legitimacy as defenders of traditional values. The solution, when it came, was characteristically African in its subtlety and indirection. A series of ceremonies were organized, ostensibly to celebrate traditional festivals, but actually designed to address the drought. The colonial government provided financial support for these ceremonies, while maintaining the fiction that they were merely supporting cultural preservation. The priests conducted their weather magic while maintaining that they were simply carrying out traditional religious obligations. The rains that followed were heavy and sustained, breaking the drought and averting the social crisis that had threatened to destabilize the entire region. Both sides claimed credit for the success, the colonial authorities pointing to their enlightened policy of supporting traditional culture, the priests noting that their ceremonies had achieved their intended results. The truth, as is often the case in such situations, was probably more complex than either side was willing to acknowledge. The episode established a pattern that would persist throughout the colonial period and beyond. Weather magic became a form of parallel authority that operated alongside, but separate from official governmental power. The priests who wielded this authority found themselves in a unique position. They were too valuable to be suppressed completely, but too dangerous to be fully incorporated into the colonial system. This parallel authority became particularly important during the independence movements of the mid-20th century. Yoruba weather workers found themselves recruited by nationalist leaders who understood that the ability to control atmospheric conditions could be a powerful tool in the struggle against colonial rule. Demonstrations and political rallies were timed to coincide with favorable weather conditions, while ceremonies designed to bring storms and disruption were scheduled to interfere with colonial activities. The spiritual and political dimensions of this weather magic were inseparable. The priests who practiced it understood that their power over atmospheric forces was intimately connected to their role as guardians of traditional Yoruba values and institutions. They saw themselves not simply as technical specialists in meteorological manipulation, but as warriors in a spiritual battle for the soul of their people. This understanding persists in contemporary Nigeria, where Shango priests continue to play important roles in political and social movements. The ceremonies they conduct in their shrines serve multiple purposes. They maintain the spiritual traditions that connect modern Yoruba people to their ancestors. They provide practical services to communities that depend on agriculture and are vulnerable to the vagaries of weather. And they serve as focal points for political organizing and resistance. The complexity of this role is perhaps best illustrated by the contemporary practice of weather warfare, the use of ceremonial interventions to influence political outcomes through the manipulation of atmospheric conditions. During election seasons, competing political parties will sometimes employ weather workers to ensure favorable conditions for their rallies while disrupting the activities of their opponents. The priests who provide these services operate in a gray area between traditional religious practice and modern political consulting, their ancient skills adapted to contemporary purposes. The technology they employ represents a fascinating fusion of traditional African knowledge systems with modern scientific understanding. A contemporary Shango priest might use traditional divination techniques to determine the most auspicious timing for a weather ceremony, while employing modern meteorological data to ensure that the atmospheric conditions are suitable for the type of intervention being attempted. The result is a form of weather magic that is both deeply rooted in ancient tradition and remarkably effective in contemporary contexts. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the Yoruba approach to weather magic is its democratic character. Unlike the traditions we have explored in other parts of Africa, where weather control is typically the monopoly of a single ruler or priesthood, the Yoruba system allows for multiple practitioners operating in different communities and serving different constituencies. This multiplicity creates a form of atmospheric politics where competing interests can be pursued simultaneously, leading to complex negotiations and compromises that mirror the broader political dynamics of Yoruba society. The shrine of Babalawo Aduni, where we began this exploration, serves as a microcosm of this larger system. On any given day, the shrine might be visited by farmers seeking favorable weather for their crops, politicians hoping to ensure good conditions for their campaigns, and ordinary citizens looking for spiritual guidance in navigating the complexities of modern life. The priest who serves them all must balance these competing demands while maintaining his obligations to the spiritual forces he represents. As evening falls over the ancient city of Oyo, and the first rumbles of thunder announce the approach of the seasonal rains, the complexity and sophistication of the Yoruba approach to weather magic becomes apparent. This is not simply a matter of primitive superstition or exotic ritual, but rather a comprehensive system for understanding and influencing the atmospheric forces that shape human life. It is a system that has survived centuries of political upheaval, cultural transformation, and technological change, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its essential character. The thunder conclusion, where the sky meets the earth. Our journey through the world of African rainmakers draws to a close as the evening settles over the diverse landscapes we have explored together. From the vast savannas of the Dinka to the colonial courts of Rhodesia, from the misty mountains of the Rain Queen to the bustling shrines of Yorubaland, we have witnessed the remarkable diversity of human approaches to one of our most fundamental challenges, the relationship between human communities and the forces that govern our weather. The stories we have shared tonight reveal something profound about the human condition, something that transcends the specific cultural contexts in which these remarkable individuals operated. They remind us that the boundary between the natural and the supernatural, between the scientific and the spiritual, between the personal and the political, has never been as clear-cut as our modern minds might assume. In the hands of these weather workers, the simple act of calling down rain becomes a complex meditation on power, responsibility, community, and the mysterious forces that shape our world. The Dinka rainmaker, standing in his sacred grove as the first drops of the long-awaited rain begin to fall, embodies the quiet dignity of those who shoulder the weight of their community's survival. His careful preparations, his measured chants, his deep understanding of the rhythms of the natural world, all of these reflect a way of being in the world that sees human consciousness as intimately connected to the larger patterns of existence. Chief Makomi, facing the power of the colonial state with the same calm authority he brought to his negotiations with the sky, represents the persistence of ancient forms of legitimacy in the face of modern forms of power. His story reminds us that authority based on spiritual understanding and community consent can be remarkably resilient, even when confronted by the apparently overwhelming force of imperial control. The Rain Queen, hidden in her sacred domain among the ancient cycads, embodies the mystery of knowledge systems that operate according to principles our science has not yet fully grasped. Her ability to influence weather patterns through methods that blend chemistry, psychology, and spiritual practice suggests that there are still aspects of the natural world that cannot be fully understood through conventional scientific approaches alone. And the Shango priests of Yorubaland, with their sophisticated integration of traditional wisdom and modern knowledge, their explicit engagement with political power, and their democratic approach to weather magic, demonstrate that these ancient practices can adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential character and effectiveness. What connects all of these figures is their recognition that weather is never simply a matter of atmospheric physics, but rather a complex interaction between human consciousness and natural forces, between individual will and community need, between earthly politics and celestial power. They understood that the rains fall not just because of temperature differentials and pressure systems, but because of the relationships that exist between all the elements of the world, human, natural, and spiritual. In our modern world, with its satellite weather forecasting and computer climate models, its industrial agriculture and urban planning, we might be tempted to dismiss these ancient weather workers as quaint relics of a more primitive time. But their stories suggest otherwise. They remind us that the relationship between human communities and the forces that govern our climate is far more complex and mysterious than our purely technological approaches often acknowledge. The challenges facing our world today: climate change, environmental degradation, the disruption of traditional weather patterns, are challenges that require not just scientific understanding and technological innovation, but also the kind of wisdom that these rainmakers embodied. They understood that human beings are not separate from the natural world, but rather intimately connected to it, that our actions have consequences that ripple outward through systems we can barely comprehend, and that the responsibility for maintaining balance between human needs and natural forces is both sacred and urgent. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you might carry with you something of the perspective these remarkable individuals brought to their work. The rain that falls outside your window, the wind that moves through the trees, the patterns of weather that shape your daily life, all of these are part of the same great system that the Dinka Rainmakers sought to understand, that Chief Makoni defended against colonial interference, that the Rain Queen continues to influence from her sacred domain, and that the Shango priests work to harmonize with the needs of their communities. The sky above us is the same sky that has watched over humanity throughout our long history, and the forces that move through it are the same forces that have shaped the rise and fall of civilizations, the success and failure of harvests, the hopes and fears of countless generations. In the stories of these rainmakers, we find not just fascinating glimpses of exotic practices from distant places, but rather profound insights into the human condition itself, our relationship with forces beyond our control, our responsibility to our communities, and our eternal quest to find meaning and purpose in the face of the vast mysteries that surround us. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the world tonight, the ancient practices continue. The rains will fall when they are called. The balance will be maintained by those who understand their responsibility to the whole. And the great conversation between earth and sky will continue, as it has for millennia, as it will for millennia to come.